everyone, and welcome to day 4 of my Halloween 2011 card series. So for today's card, I'm using a set by Inkadinkado called Trick or Treat. I picked it up at Michael's about a month ago. This little main character image is what caught my eye at the store, and I had to buy it. The one thing I noticed though, it says clear stamps. When I went to peel it off, these are vinyl, not photopolymer, and if you're not familiar with that, vinyl is just very different from just clear photopolymer stamps. You just have to be really, really careful with peeling them off the sheet. And then they work best with pigment ink, so it's a good thing I had already decided to use the Brilliance Graphite Black ink to stamp the image so that it gives it that really crisp black detail. And then I heat set that with my embossing gun before I went in to color it with the Copics so that the ink doesn't smear, because that's one thing you have to be careful of with Brilliance ink. So I'm just using the W's again to color the skeleton and then the ghost, using W3, W1, and W00, and just coloring really lightly because there's no need to do a ton of detail and blending with an image like this, in my opinion. And then the browns, I'm just using E34, E31, and E30, going lightest to darkest and then going backwards to blend it all together. And yeah, I'm just using a really light touch as I color, trying not to touch too much of the black. On this ghost it's a little bit harder because of the little dots everywhere. But yeah, I love Brilliance ink for the detail, and it just gives a really solid black, but I don't like it when I'm coloring with Copics because it can smear so easily even when it's heat set, in my opinion. But it works for this image and I'm really happy with how it ended up turning out. So for the orange areas, I'm just using my YR 04, 07, and 09. And then the little witch's face, I used YG 21 and 23. And then blended that and then added a bit of brown to the little broom with my, I think it was the E31 I used on that one. And then finally, I wanted to add a bit of purple to the image because of the pattern paper I'm going to be using has purple in it. So I did the same trick I did on my first card and just used purple for the shading and the shadows. So I'm using my BV11 as the darkest, then going in with the BV000 and adding a bit of shadows to the rest of the image, and then blending everything out with my BV000. And I'm really happy with how the purple just kind of makes these images look. It just gives it a little extra something to all these little Halloween images, and I quite like it. So once I've got it all colored, I am using my Spellbinders pumpkin die that I showed in a recent haul video. I was determined to use it on a card, and that's what inspired me. That was kind of the main, that and this image were my main sources for this whole card. And I wanted the main image to be on the pumpkin. So I cut the one piece from some pattern paper, and I'm using the Basic Gray Eerie collection. And then I'd use the die again, obviously, to cut out the main image, which I'll be adhering over the pumpkin later on. And then I'm still on kind of a sponging kick, so I used Memento Tangelo, and then I'll use Memento Rich Cocoa ink to kind of sponge all around the main image and the pumpkin. I end up adding the Rich Cocoa later on, you'll see in a minute. And this card is actually going to be a 5.5 inch square card. I wanted to make a bigger card this time to fit this pumpkin and still have a bit of detail on the card. So that purple cardstock I ended up sponging the Rich Cocoa ink onto to kind of distress it a bit, because these pattern papers are a little more like funky, distressed and whatnot. So just solid cardstock seems out of place. So I kind of had a layout in my head, and then I wanted to add a sentiment. So I decided to use the sentiment from the Trick or Treat set, and then just a strip of olive cardstock to stamp that onto. And again, I'm just using the Brilliance ink to stamp that onto there, as it gives the best detail, especially with vinyl stamps. This ink seems to be perfect with that. It's a lot harder with dye ink to use dye ink on vinyl stamps because it pools up a lot more and kind of beads, if you know what I mean. So once I've got the sentiment stamped, I sponge the edges of that as well with the Rich Cocoa ink and a sponge dauber. And then I start to figure out like exactly how I want my layout, and then I trying to figure out how I want embellishments and whatnot, and I want to use the buttons from the Basic Great Eerie collection. So I just kind of lay out everything how I want, just so I've got an idea in mind, and then I go ahead and adhere all the pattern paper and the card front basically together. Since that's all done, it's just a matter of adding the embellishments afterwards. So I get everything adhered first using my ATG gun, and then once everything's in place and laid out, I can start adding all of my embellishments. And after I had finished adhering everything, I decided I wanted to add some baker's twine as well. So I just wrapped some lilac baker's twine around the bottom part of the card. And it's just habit. I always want to wrap baker's twine 3 times and tie it. I don't know. It's like an OCD thing. Like, it can't be added unless it's wrapped 3 times. I don't know. So yeah, wrap that around 3 times and then tie it in a bow, trim the ends, and then I go on to adding the buttons to the card front. So I'm just using a little foam mat underneath, and then I always lay out the buttons how I want them, and then I use my paper piercer to pierce the holes for the buttons while they're just laying there. And then once I've got that all done, I can start sewing the buttons on, and I'm just using some white embroidery thread and a needle to sew the buttons into place. Really quick and easy. I just go from, I usually start at the bottom or the top and just work my way up to finish all the buttons, and then once they're all sewed into place, I just flip the card front over and tie the ends together in a knot, and then trim those off, and then all the buttons are adhered, they look finished and super easy to do. And then finally I wanted to add a few little bats to the top right corner because it just was looking pretty empty right there. So I'm using the Martha Stewart punch and some black cardstock and just punched out 3 little bats, and then I adhere them onto the card front with some Tombow Mono Multi Glue. And then finally, once I've got those adhered, I flip over the card front and then tape down the baker's twine with some acid-free tape, and then add my ATG adhesive, and then adhere that to the actual card base, which is just black cardstock. And the reason I chose the 5.5-inch square card is that's the biggest you can go on with an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. Just cut it at 5.5 by 11 inches, score in the middle, and you've got a big square card. So and then once I was done that, I decided I wanted to add just a little bit of sparkle. So I'm using my black diamond Stickles and basically just dabbing it. I'm not completely filling in all the black areas. I'm just lightly dabbing it in the places I want, like on those bats and on some of the main image. And doing it this way too, it dries way quicker. So I've set that aside to dry, and then I'm just working on the inside of the card. So again, using a few different pattern papers from the Eerie collection. And then I used that pumpkin die just to die cut a piece of white cardstock where the message can be written. And then I also wanted to add a sentiment to it, and this is also from that Trick or Treat set. So I inked it up with the Tangelo Memento ink, stamped it off once onto a scrap of cardstock, and then stamped it again onto that die cut pumpkin image, so it's just very faint and won't interfere with whatever the written message is from to the recipient. And then again, sponging everything with the orange ink and then adding a little bit of brown to just stress it a little bit more. And then I had die cut that little bottom piece using the pumpkin die. And then it's just a matter of adhering all of the pattern papers for the inside together. And then finally I also wanted to add a few more little bats to the inside since it's just quick and easy. So I just punched out 3 more little bats and then adhered them to the inside of the card, and then adhered that to the actual inside of the card itself. And that's all there was to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to check out my other ones if you haven't seen them, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye!